The CIA didn't just influence the news. They captured the newsrooms themselves. In the late 1940s, they launched a covert program called Operation Mockingbird to place their agents inside America's most powerful media companies: CBS, Time, the New York Times, wire services, radio networks. The goal was simple: shape what Americans believed without them ever knowing. In 1979, investigative journalist Deborah Davis published an account of meetings between CIA personnel and Washington Post publisher Philip Graham. In those meetings, a CIA operative explained how easy it was to buy a member of the press. You could get a journalist cheaper than a good call girl for a couple $100 a month. That wasn't a metaphor. It was a price quote. In 1977, a man named Sig Mickelson sat for an interview. He was the man who put Walter Cronkite behind the anchor desk. Cronkite, the CBS anchor man who would become so synonymous with credibility that a national poll named him the most trusted man in America. That was the newsroom Mickelson built. And when he was asked about that newsroom's relationship with the Central Intelligence Agency, the president of CBS News assumed that a working relationship between America's most trusted newsroom and a covert intelligence agency was just how things worked. This video is about how he was right. It was normal. And that's the problem. This is a documentary about the CIA's infiltration of American media, what insiders called the mighty Wurlitzer. What you're about to hear isn't speculation. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a documentary built entirely from congressional testimony, declassified CIA documents, published confessions, and Pulitzer Prize-winning investigations. Every claim is sourced. Every quote is documented. This is their system, exposed in their own words. Section 1. The Architecture. Before Mickelson ever walked into that job at CBS, the infrastructure was already in place. What insiders would later call Operation Mockingbird didn't begin with journalists. It began with a signature. In 1947, the Central Intelligence Agency was created. 1 year later, the National Security Council signed a secret directive authorizing the CIA to conduct permanent propaganda operations. Not as a wartime emergency, but as ongoing American policy. The directive, known as NSC 10/2, used exact language worth hearing. It authorized propaganda, economic warfare, preventive direct action, including sabotage, and support of indigenous anti-communist elements. That wasn't aimed at the Soviet Union alone. This authorized covert propaganda as a permanent instrument of American foreign policy, including against allied nations and eventually against American citizens themselves. And there was a second provision that matters even more. These operations were to be so planned and conducted that if they ever surfaced publicly, the U.S. government could plausibly disclaim any responsibility. Plausible deniability wasn't an afterthought. It was designed into the system from the first sentence. One man was put in charge of building this machine. His name was Frank Wisner. During World War II, Wisner served in the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. After the war, he was appointed to run the CIA's covert action arm. And he understood something most people in Washington didn't. He understood that in the 20th century, controlling information was more powerful than controlling territory. So he started with the news. He placed agents inside newsrooms. He funded publications. He built relationships with the publishers and editors who decided what Americans would read and hear. And when he described what he'd built, he used a specific analogy. Wisner called it his mighty Wurlitzer, a reference to the massive theater organs that could play an entire orchestra of instruments from a single console. One player, every instrument. That was the vision. One intelligence agency, playing every major news outlet in the Western world, and what the congressional record shows is that Wisner came remarkably close to achieving it. Future CIA Director William Colby described the atmosphere Wisner created in his 1978 memoir, Honorable Men, as an order of Knights Templars to save Western freedom from communist darkness. Joining was a rather glamorous and fashionable and certainly a most patriotic thing to do. Glamorous, fashionable, patriotic. That's a CIA director's language. Not describing wartime sacrifice, describing the recruitment of America's best and brightest into a covert propaganda network. In 1977, Carl Bernstein, the reporter who broke Watergate, published the results of a 6-month investigation. He had interviewed more than 35 current and former CIA officials, plus senators and staff from the Senate Intelligence Committee. What he documented was staggering. Among the media executives who cooperated with the CIA, William Paley of CBS, Henry Luce of Time Incorporated, Arthur Hayes Sulzberger of the New York Times. But the list didn't stop at 3. ABC, NBC, the Associated Press, United Press International, Reuters, Hearst. That is not a list of fringe publications. That is every major news organization in the United States, and several international ones. And according to CIA officials themselves, the 3 most valuable relationships were with the New York Times, CBS, and Time Incorporated. Which brings us back to Sig Mickelson. Because CBS wasn't just on the list, it was at the top. Section 2. The CBS File. Bernstein wrote, CBS was unquestionably the CIA's most valuable broadcasting asset. The network Americans trusted more than any other, the network of Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite, was, according to the CIA's own assessment, their single most valuable tool in broadcasting, and the relationship started at the very top. CBS Chairman William Paley and CIA Director Allen Dulles didn't just have a working relationship. They had a social one. Georgetown, the Washington neighborhood where intelligence chiefs and media executives lived on the same streets, attended the same dinners, and sent their children to the same schools, was where the real arrangements were made. A source described it to Bernstein this way: the P and Q Street axis in Georgetown. P and Q Streets, the Georgetown neighborhood where CIA directors and media executives lived on the same blocks, attended the same dinners, and sent their children to the same schools. That's where the real arrangements were made. Not in offices, not on paper, at dinner parties between neighbors. You don't tell William Paley to sign a piece of paper saying he won't think. Think, meaning betray the arrangement. You don't hand the chairman of CBS a non-disclosure agreement. It would be an insult. Men at that level operated on a handshake. The relationship didn't need contracts or paperwork. It ran on trust, class, solidarity, and shared ideology, and what Paley agreed to provide was extraordinary. According to Bernstein's investigation, based on CIA officials' own statements, CBS gave the agency cover for its employees, including at least one well-known foreign correspondent who was secretly working for the CIA. CBS shared its newsfilm library. It allowed the agency to monitor reports by CBS correspondents. And once a year during the 1950s and early 1960s, CBS correspondents gathered for private dinners and briefings with CIA leadership. Now, into this arrangement walked Sig Mickelson. In 1954, Mickelson was named president of CBS News. He was the man who would put Walter Cronkite behind the anchor desk. He was building what would become the most watched, most trusted news operation in America. And on his first day, his boss called him in and handed him an assignment that had nothing to do with journalism. When I moved into the job, I was told by Paley that there was an ongoing relationship with the CIA. He introduced me to 2 agents who he said would keep in touch. We all discuss the Goodrich situation and film arrangements. Think about what just happened. The chairman of CBS walked the president of CBS News into a room with 2 intelligence officers and told him this was his to manage now. And Mickelson managed it. Because what was his alternative? Paley had built CBS. He was the chairman. He was introducing you to CIA agents in his office. This wasn't a request. The integrity of American journalism, the thing Mickelson had spent his career building, was being compromised by the man who signed his paycheck, and he went along with it. Dr. Frank Stanton served as president of CBS for 25 years. According to CIA officials, Stanton was aware of the general arrangements Paley made with Dulles. And when Mickelson complained about having to use a pay telephone to call the CIA because he didn't want these calls going through the CBS switchboard, Stanton had a suggestion: install a private line, one that bypassed the CBS switchboard entirely. Think about that. Mickelson didn't refuse the relationship, but he tried to keep it off the books. He used a payphone. He didn't want his calls to Langley running through the switchboard where someone might notice. That's not the behavior of a willing collaborator. That's the behavior of a man who knew what he was doing was wrong and couldn't stop doing it. And Stanton's solution, a private line, didn't just make the calls easier. It erased the last trace of Mickelson's discomfort. A direct, unlogged phone line from CBS News to the Central Intelligence Agency. Think about the image. The president of CBS News in his office, the same office where decisions were being made about what millions of Americans would see on their televisions that night, picks up a phone that doesn't ring through the switchboard. That phone connects to Langley, and nobody outside that room knows it exists. At least 2 CBS employees were confirmed CIA operatives working under journalistic cover. Stringer Austin Goodrich in Stockholm, correspondent Frank Kearns in Cairo. In October 1954, when Mickelson returned from touring CBS's European bureaus, Paley called him into his office. 2 CIA officials were there. They wanted to know why Mickelson hadn't visited Goodrich while in Stockholm. Not because Goodrich had filed a bad story, because the visit would have been useful to Goodrich's CIA cover. The chairman of CBS was managing his news division's travel schedule for the benefit of the CIA. And the journalists who weren't operatives, they were cultivated. The CIA official explained how a few more lunches, a few more favors, and only then might there be a mention of a formal arrangement. He called it what it was. That came later, after you had the journalist on a string. That's the CIA's language, not mine, and it describes a grooming process that anyone who studies manipulation would recognize. Start with access. Build dependency. Then formalize the relationship once the person is too deep to refuse. And when Congress investigated, when the Church Committee looked into CIA operations, they heard something revealing from CIA Director William Colby himself. Bernstein documented what Colby told the committee's investigators. Let's not pick on some poor reporters, for God's sake. Let's go to the managements. They were witting. Witting. That's an intelligence term. It means they knew. The CIA director wasn't defending the agency. He was defending the reporters. He was telling Congress, stop looking at the foot soldiers. The people who ran the news organizations authorized this from the top. Paley, Luce, Sulzberger. The managements were witting. That's not Bernstein's conclusion. That's the CIA director's testimony, not the reporters. The managements. That distinction matters. The CIA didn't need 400 compromised journalists. They needed a handful of compromised owners. Paley signs Mickelson's paycheck. Luce signs his editor's paychecks. Sulzberger signs his. Capture the person who controls the institution, and everyone inside it follows. Not because they're corrupt, but because the alternative is their career. That's not infiltration, that's acquisition. And if this documentary changed how you see the news, hit the hype button and share it with someone who needs to see it. It costs you nothing, but it helps this reach the people the system was designed to keep in the dark. Because in the next video, you'll hear what happened when Congress finally investigated, what they found, and what they decided not to touch. Section 3. The Printing Press. The third case file isn't about institutions. It's about what happened to the people who discovered they'd been played. Michelson managed the CBS relationship, but CBS was just one instrument on the Wurlitzer. The print operation was even larger, and in some ways more insidious. What comes next are 3 case files. A media empire compromised from the top. A global propaganda network built from scratch. And what happened to the people who discovered they'd been played. Because what the CIA built in print wasn't just a network of cooperating journalists. It was an entire intellectual ecosystem. The CIA's network included hundreds of assets. We can't examine every single case file today, but these 3 from the public record show exactly how the machine operated. Historian Hugh Wilford wrote that during the Cold War, it was difficult to tell precisely where the loose empire's overseas intelligence network ended and the CIA's began. Henry Luce, the founder of Time, Life, and Fortune, readily allowed certain members of his staff to work for the agency and agreed to provide jobs and credentials for other CIA operatives who lacked journalistic experience. One Time Incorporated executive, C.D. Jackson, served as Luce's personal contact with the CIA while simultaneously advising President Eisenhower on Cold War strategy. He had one foot in America's most powerful media company and one foot in the White House. That's not a conflict of interest. That's the absence of any boundary at all. But here's what makes this a hostile witness story rather than a simple exposé. Inside Time Incorporated, some editors knew this was wrong and said so, and the proof of their dissent stayed buried for 70 years. In 2024, historian Simon Wilmets at the University of Leiden published a study in the journal Diplomatic History that uncovered internal Time Incorporated documents that had never been made public. When Luce's senior editors were polled about the CIA arrangement, they were unanimous. John Shaw Billings, the deputy editorial director, reported to Luce. Although each has a little different argument in principle, they all come back to this proposition. It is wrong for journalists to be working for an intelligence agency. Billings told Luce directly, "I believe that the editors are right and should tell the CIA once and for all, no." Luce partially listened. He ended the practice of sharing foreign correspondents' dispatches directly with the CIA. But the company continued giving the agency access to Life magazine's photographic archive for another decade. And the editor's dissent never went public, not in the 1950s, not in the 1970s when Bernstein was investigating. The code of silence held for 70 years until that Oxford study found the documents. The editors who objected were silenced within the institution. The writers who were used were never told at all. That was the Wurlitzer's design. It neutralized resistance and awareness simultaneously. And nowhere was this clearer than in the CIA's own publications. That was the first case file. A media empire compromised from the top. The second is worse. The CIA didn't just work with existing news outlets, it created its own. Imagine a literary magazine, one of the most respected in the English-speaking world. Major writers compete for space. Intellectuals across Europe treat it as required reading. And the editors don't know, have never been told, that the CIA is paying for the whole thing. That magazine was called Encounter, and it was just one piece of something much larger. A CIA officer named Thomas Braden published a confession in the May 20th, 1967 issue of the Saturday Evening Post. The title alone tells you everything. I'm glad the CIA is immoral. In it, Braden revealed that Encounter was funded through a CIA front organization called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which operated in 35 countries, published over 20 magazines, organized international conferences, and gave out literary prizes. Braden admitted, "We had placed one agent in a Europe-based organization of intellectuals called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Another agent became an editor of Encounter. And the CIA was pouring approximately $900,000 a year into it." Stop and think about what that means. A single intelligence agency operating in 35 countries, publishing over 20 magazines, organizing international conferences, handing out literary prizes, and none of the readers, none of the conference attendees, none of the prize recipients had any idea who was paying for it. That's the front organization playbook. Build something prestigious. Fund it secretly. Let real talent make it credible. The talent takes the fall when the truth surfaces. The intelligence agency walks away. Remember that structure. You'll see it again. It was the largest covert propaganda operation in the history of the Western world, and it worked. Because the people it used didn't know they were being used. The third case file isn't about institutions. It's about what happened to the people who discovered they'd been played. The writers whose work appeared in these CIA-funded publications included George Orwell, Hannah Arendt, and some of the most celebrated authors of the 20th century. They didn't know. Most of them never knew. But some people found out, and the way they found out reveals something about the human cost of this machine. Stephen Spender was one of them. He was a distinguished British poet, celebrated enough to be named co-editor of Encounter. In 1966, 1 year before the truth broke, Spender signed a public letter declaring, "We know of no indirect benefactions. We are our own masters and part of nobody's propaganda." He wasn't lying. He was repeating what he'd been told. Years later, his wife Natasha explained why the CIA chose him. He was eminently bamboozleable because he was so innocent. His father was bamboozled by Lloyd George. They're a very trusting family. It never occurs to them to think that people are telling them lies. When the truth emerged, Spender resigned in humiliation. The literary critic brought in to replace him, Frank Kermode, also resigned, writing that the editor who'd known all along had not only deceived him, but had caused him to be the agent and carrier of falsehood. If you've ever trusted an institution and later discovered it wasn't what it claimed to be, you understand something about what Spender experienced. What's an institution you trusted that turned out to have hidden influences you didn't know about? Not conspiracy theories. Real, documented cases you've verified yourself. Share it in the comments. The Wurlitzer didn't just play the news. It played the intellectuals who shaped public thought. And it played them as instruments without their knowledge or consent. Section 4. The Laboratory. Everything we've documented so far, CBS Time, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, operated during the Cold War against a backdrop of genuine Soviet threat. The Wurlitzer shaped what people thought. Reasonable can debate whether those programs were justified. But the tools Wisner built didn't stay in American newsrooms. The same techniques, front organizations, cultivated editors, covert funding of respected publications, were exported. And when the CIA turned the Wurlitzer on a democracy, the cost wasn't measured in compromised journalism. It was measured in human lives. In 1970, Salvador Allende was democratically elected president of Chile. The CIA had spent over a decade and millions of dollars trying to prevent exactly this outcome. It didn't work. The Chilean people voted for him anyway. What happened next is documented in the Church Committee's staff report. Covert Action in Chile, 1963 to 1973. 62 pages. Released December 4th, 1975. President Nixon told CIA Director Richard Helms, "If there is a way to bring Allende down, we should do it." And the Wurlitzer went to work. The CIA's primary instrument in Chile was El Mercurio, the country's most respected newspaper. Between 1970 and 1973, the CIA funneled approximately $1.5 million to the paper, funding a drumbeat of coverage designed to destabilize a democratically elected government. A CIA project memo, documented in the Church Committee's report, stated that El Mercurio played an important role in setting the stage for the military coup of September 11, 1973. The most respected newspaper in the country. $1.5 million in covert funding. A drumbeat of coverage designed to erode a democratically elected government. And when the coup came, the coverage could point to the instability it had helped create. This is the same instrument Wisner built. Find the most trusted outlet, fund it, let its credibility carry your message. The readers of El Mercurio, CBS and Time didn't know. Don't take my word for it. Pause this video. Search Church Committee Covert Action in Chile, 1975. The document is 62 pages. It's been publicly available for 50 years. You'll find that the United States government used its most sophisticated information warfare tools, the same tools built by Frank Wisner, the same institutional relationships that connected CBS to Langley against a democratic country. On September 11, 1973, the Chilean military overthrew Allende. He died in the presidential palace. General Augusto Pinochet took power. Over the next 17 years, Pinochet's regime killed over 3,000 people. Tens of thousands more were tortured. Entire families disappeared. Among the dead was Charles Horman, an American journalist and filmmaker living in Santiago. Horman was detained by Chilean military forces in the days following the coup and never seen alive again. A U.S. State Department investigation later concluded that American intelligence officials had played a role in his death. An American journalist, killed in a coup that American propaganda tools helped create. The Wurlitzer wasn't an abstraction, it wasn't a metaphor, it was a machine. And when it was turned against a democracy, real people died. Charles Horman was 31 years old. The reason you're hearing about it now, the reason any of this is documented at all, is because investigators, journalists, and congressional staffers spent years forcing these records into the public. The Wurlitzer was massive, but so was the effort to expose it. Every source exists because someone insisted the truth be recorded. Every claim in this video is documented. Every source is linked. Verify it yourself, and then ask why you never heard about this. If what you've just heard about Chile changes how you see American foreign policy, hit the hype button. You get 3 a week. This information needs to reach more people. Section 5. The Scale. Mickelson was one man in one newsroom managing one CIA relationship. But Bernstein's investigation revealed the actual scale and the logic behind it. When Bernstein interviewed CIA officials for his investigation, one of them explained why the agency invested so heavily in journalists. Not ideology, not patriotism, operational economics. The official told him, "One journalist is worth 20 agents. He has access, the ability to ask questions without arousing suspicion." One journalist is worth 20 agents. That's a cost-benefit calculation from inside the CIA. A journalist walks into any room in the world, asks any question, and nobody thinks twice. An intelligence officer doing the same thing gets arrested. So how many did they recruit? Alsop is one of more than 400 American journalists who in the past 25 years have secretly carried out assignments for the Central Intelligence Agency. 400 journalists, over 25 years, secretly carrying out assignments for an intelligence agency. And now you know why. And when Bernstein published that number, a CIA official told him something even more revealing, that 400 was the low side of the actual number. Don't take my word for it. Search Carl Bernstein, CIA, and the media Rolling Stone. The full 25,000-word article is published on carlbernstein.com. Read it yourself. You'll find the 400 number. You'll find the CBS details. You'll find the names, Paley, Luce, Sulzberger, all documented, all sourced, all verified by a reporter whose previous investigation brought down a president. 400 journalists, and the CIA said that was the low estimate. Sit with that for a moment and think about what it means for every piece of news you consumed during those 25 years, or the decades that followed. But the Wurlitzer didn't play forever. In the late 1960s, the first cracks appeared. A small magazine in San Francisco called Ramparts pulled on a single thread, CIA funding of the National Student Association, and the entire tapestry began to unravel. What came next was the largest investigation into intelligence abuses in American history, the Church Committee. It would reveal everything you've heard today, and much more. That's part 2, but before you go, there's one more thing about Sig Mickelson. After leaving CBS, Mickelson went on to run Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, broadcasting operations that were themselves revealed to be CIA-funded. He left one CIA-linked news operation and walked straight into another. And in 2008, a Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times investigation revealed that the Pentagon had recruited over 75 retired military officers as secret message force multipliers on every major television network, fed talking points and classified briefings, then sent on air to deliver the government's message as if it were their own independent analysis. 30 years after Mickelson's confession, the Wurlitzer was still playing. He spent the rest of his career at Northwestern University teaching the next generation of journalists. He wrote 2 books about television and politics. He never publicly recanted the relationship. The only record of his admission is Bernstein's 1977 interview. And decades later, when he was finally asked about all of it, he didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He said, "I assumed this was a normal relationship at the time." And in 2008, 30 years after Mickelson's confession, a Fox News military analyst named Robert Bevilacqua described his own experience on television. It was them saying, "We need to stick our hands up your back and move your mouth for you." The mighty Wurlitzer. Different players, same instrument, same tune. For 50 years, this information existed in congressional reports and declassified files that most people never read. You have it now. And a system built on secrecy doesn't survive an informed public. I don't want you to trust me. I want you to verify everything yourself. That's what makes this channel different from the system it's documenting. If that approach matters to you, if you believe the public deserves access to what powerful institutions have actually said and written, subscribe. In the next video, you'll hear what happened when Congress finally investigated, and what they decided not to investigate. Despite everything Bernstein documented, the Senate Intelligence Committee decided against questioning a single reporter, editor, publisher, or broadcast executive whose relationships with the CIA were sitting in the agency's own files. The CIA convinced them that disclosure would cause irreparable damage. You'll hear the CIA director who decided how much truth to give Congress, and you'll hear the CBS journalist who obtained a secret congressional report about the CIA and discovered that his own network wouldn't let the public see it.